Thank you for joining this seminar. We are really delighted to have Jonathan Malacarne here, who is from University of Maine, and together with Paswel Marenya. So Jonathan should present the paper, while Paswel should discuss the scaling related to the learnings from the paper. This is a study that started as a SPIA proposal development grant many years ago, and now, from what I've heard, it's about to get well published, or hopefully on its way to get well published. So we are proud of this work and the progress that it's made, and we think it's a nice example to share with many of us. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Rashid. And yeah, so I believe it's out in the Economic Journal now, and in much more detail than I'm going to have time to discuss today. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to check it out or to reach out and follow up with me afterwards. Let me grab my slides. Can you see my slides okay, Rashid? Can I get a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. As Rashid said, my name is Jonathan Malacarne. I'm an assistant professor of agricultural economics at the University of Maine now. When this work started, I was at UC Davis with a number of my co-authors here. And we've been working on this for what feels like a long time, and I keep waiting to get tired of it. I was thinking about this as I prepared for the last couple of days, and I just don't. I'm still really excited about this work. I think what we had an opportunity to do was really fascinating, and the results are really fascinating. And I'm especially excited to have Paswel here today to talk about scaling up as in addition to just the results of the paper, because this paper really, and the work in it really was a first step, well, not even a first step, was a step building on the development of some resilience enhancing tools and seeing how they work in the field. But it's definitely not the last step as we accumulate evidence that they work for households. The work is just beginning in figuring out how to make them accessible and get them to the households that can benefit the most from them. So I'm not going to run through everybody's affiliations on this paper, nor will I have an opportunity to mention all of our true partners. But my co-authors are mentioned here: Steve Boucher, Michael Carter, and Travis Libbert at UC Davis, United Flatness, Paswel Marenya, and Laura Paul. As Rashid mentioned, this started as a SPIA proposal. It also was received funding through USAID and had many partners on the research side: UC Davis, the Basis Innovation Lab, which is now the MRR Innovation Lab, and then many in-country partners that Paswel will mention, running various aspects of the project. So we're going to spend most of our time today thinking about some work in central Mozambique and in Tanzania. This project ran for a number of years with and focused on smallholding maize farmers in 2 districts in Mozambique and 6 districts in Tanzania. And importantly for this work, this is a sample that demonstrates an extreme lack of resilience at the beginning of the project. And this is really going to be the motivating factor for the technologies that we're studying and for hopefully ultimately scaling them up. And when I say that they demonstrate an extreme lack of resilience, what I'm talking about is illustrated in the figure on the right. And this is based off an econometric model that we'll talk about later. But that households in this sample demonstrate a lack of resilience in the sense that when they suffer a shock, that shock is detrimental to outcomes that are important to them, and they struggle to recover from that shock. So what we've pictured on the right is a projection where we imagine a good agricultural season at the beginning, which for the sample that we work with still starts from fairly low maize yields, around 500 kilograms per hectare. And we're going to focus largely on drought. 2 types of drought, to be specific: a mid-season moderate drought and a more severe full-season drought. Both of these shocks result in large maize yield losses for households in the region that we're studying. A mid-season drought depresses maize yields by about 34%. A full season drought depresses maize yields by about 70%. And both of those effects linger. Household outcomes in the year that the shock happens, but either through decapitalization, through increasing precautionary savings, and any of a variety of mechanisms, they generate effects that continue to negatively impact households out into the future. And so what we want to study, or what we're studying in this project, are whether or not a variety of technologies can improve household resilience by themselves and whenever they're bundled together. We're going to focus on two technologies and on a prototype, a bundle of those two technologies that builds on what they do well individually and tries to overcome some of their shortcomings by kind of thoughtfully knitting them together. So those technologies, which I'll describe in more detail in a minute, are drought-tolerant maize varieties and index-based agricultural insurance. This paper is really dense, which is one of the reasons I encourage you to take a look at it if you're interested. Today, I'm going to try to focus on the highlights of three questions. First, does drought-tolerant maize successfully mitigate the within and across season effects of mid-season drought, which is the peril that it was bred to deal with well? Can bundling drought-tolerant maize with index insurance mitigate the effects of severe drought being the thing that index insurance is most capable of picking up and dealing with? And then how are those effects, if they exist, which, spoiler, we're going to find that they do exist and that they're fairly strong, how are they either enhanced or undercut by early experience with these technologies? So if we get through all of that in 25 minutes, I'll feel really good. And let's get into it. First, a little bit of more information about the structure of the project on which this paper is based. So we ran a multi-country, multi-year randomized controlled trial across 162 communities in Mozambique and Tanzania. The breadth of its geographic spread and its timeline is really important, both for the research questions and for the econometrics that we do, because we need a lot of variation in weather outcomes and household decisions in order to study the resilience enhancing potential of the technologies. Put another way, you really can't study the effects of drought or how technologies mitigate that drought if you don't see drought. And so by having a spatially diversified design and by observing these households over a number of years, we increased the possibility that we would see the type of events that we needed and that households needed to learn about how these technologies work. And this study ran for 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. The first technology component that's studied in this paper are drought-tolerant maize varieties. Drought-tolerant maize varieties are conventionally bred. The ones that we're going to study were developed by CIMMYT over a period of time, and they focus on moderate mid-season drought. If you're not familiar with the maize growing cycle, this is roughly what it looks like. You have an establishment phase. For yields, the critical period is really the pollination phase, when the pollen's ready to drop from the tassels and the silks are ready to receive it. And as that process takes place, you get maize grains. If there is a drought during this period, then pollination fails and yields are really low. And so drought-tolerant maize was developed, or the varieties we're studying were developed by the Drought-Tolerant Maize for Africa initiative. Paswel can maybe tell us the exact number of varieties released by that project, but it was impressive. And they are now locally available through local seed companies in the countries and areas that we're working. And drought-tolerant maize was bred to deal with this single peril, this mid-season drought. And by everything we know so far, it does it really well, and it does it really cheaply now that it's developed, despite the kind of large upfront investment that was required to get it to the market. Drought conditions, drought-tolerant maize under mid-season drought has been shown to have up to 137% yield advantage over kind of similar non-drought tolerant varieties. The observed impacts or the observed advantages less out in the real world on less controlled conditions, but still has demonstrated itself as well, both kind of in controlled research, but non-experimentation conditions, and as our co-author Laura Paul demonstrates in some other work, among households in non-controlled conditions as well. While drought-tolerant maize is drought-tolerant, it is not drought-proof. It still requires rainfall to establish in the early part of the season. It still requires rainfall throughout in order to survive as a plant. And so we tried to complement it with an index insurance product. The product that we use in this project is what we call a fail-safe satellite-based index insurance product. And it's going to use two triggers. The first, and two triggers designed to complement the protection that already exists in drought-tolerant maize. So the first is an early season rainfall trigger. So if rainfall during the first 40 days of the season falls below a threshold, then the insurance will make a payment. The second is a predicted yield. So if predicted yields kind of based on a model takes as its inputs satellite measured rainfall and NDVI, predict that yields in an insurance zone fall below 60% of their historical average, then the insurance makes a payout as well. And then for the purpose of this project, the insurance was made available through local in-country partners, and it carried a 20% premium on top of the seeds. So you purchase the seeds, they came with the insurance, and the idea of the bundle is that the biological insurance inherent to the drought-tolerant seeds would protect against moderate drought. Protection in the financial product would protect against other kinds of drought. And together, they could offer fuller coverage at a lower price than either technology working by itself. And this is the element or the sense in which we talk about these technologies as being complementary. Right? They were intentionally designed to cover more risk at a lower cost than either could in isolation. The way our randomization worked was that we took our set of communities and we created matched triplets. In Mozambique, those matches were all proximate, so 3 communities close to each other. In Tanzania, because of the topography, it was a little bit different. We matched based on a set of agroecological conditions and market access conditions. And then each triplet, communities were randomly assigned to either control group, where we just did surveys, to receive community level promotion of drought-tolerant maize by itself, or to receive community level promotion of drought-tolerant maize bundled with the index insurance product. So you purchase the bundled product, you get the seeds, and it comes with this insurance. Here's a picture of some of that community level promotion. In Mozambique, we worked with 2 local seed companies, Klein Karoo and Phoenix Seeds, and working with the seed companies, working with our insurance company partner, we would conduct community meetings to make sure that, one, the seeds were accessible in these areas. We knew that they were commercially available in the countries, but we needed to make sure that they were available in the community that we were studying. And then 2, to make sure that the households in the communities really understood the protection provided by the 2 technologies. We did this by carrying out fairly intensive community level training to demonstrate and educate on the benefits of the 2 technologies. So here our research team is training on the different parts of the maize season and comparing how drought-tolerant maize and non-drought-tolerant maize respond to mid-season drought, indicated by the little red cards. And we did something similar with full season drought and with respect to insurance to make sure that community members understood when insurance payouts could be expected, the form that they would take, that they understood the basis risk problem, and that to the extent possible, without actually having experienced drought or the seeds themselves or the product themselves, that they knew how it was supposed to work. We selected the sample because it was the sample where drought-tolerant maize and index insurance have a lot of potential. So these were farmers who were primary subsistence or semi-subsistence farmers. They experienced fairly low levels of yield to begin with and made very moderate investments in maize production. The average baseline control group mean harvest was under 400 kgs per hectare, which is very low if you're considering improved maize varieties. Most of these households are planting local saved maize seed, not improved varieties at the beginning of this project. And they cultivate about 2 hectares of maize, so not plots. The randomization I described was pretty successful. We did have some balance issues in maize yield, which is a problematic place to have an issue. We traced it back to a few 2 districts in Tanzania, and the paper kind of goes into exhaustive detail in how we deal with that, from kind of expanding our preferred ANCOVA specification to a difference in difference specification, and trimming the sample to just exclude those 2 communities. Our results are pretty robust to all of those strategies. And if you're interested, I would kind of refer you to the paper there. Oops, that was backwards. One of the real challenges is with this project is that the randomization I described is important, but it was only half of the randomization that really mattered. The other half is controlled by the weather. So I discussed randomization of treatments. The weather was in charge of randomizing or determining whether or not the households in the sample we were studying were going to experience the drought shocks that correspond to the protective potential of the 2 technologies. And nature decided that they would. So across the sample, across the years, we observe substantial incidence of both the mid-season drought that the DT seeds are designed to protect against, and the more severe yield shocks that the insurance is intended to pick up. I promise I'm not going to expect you to digest our primary econometric specification in 2 seconds. I'm putting it up here so that you don't feel like I'm hiding it from you. We're going to rely, our preferred specification is an ANCOVA specification. And our ANCOVA specification is going to include a lot of switches, which is how I think about them. Switches that are going to allow us to turn on and off different drought shocks and to interact those drought shocks with access to the different technologies in the bundle in order to see how the drought affects households and how access to the technologies allows households to mitigate the effects of that drought. So we have an indicator for the mid-season drought. We have an indicator for the severe drought, this CIST variable. And then we have indicators for access to the seed technology, access to the insurance technology, and then one for end line, which is going to be important as some of the benefits we're trying to study, you can only see at end line. This first line is going to help us reinforce and quantify the drought is bad or drought is harmful effect that I mentioned and illustrated at the beginning. And we see that drought really is harmful both within season and across season for these households. So drought depresses yields by 25 to 35%. for control households within season, and those effects moderate only slightly as we look at the lagged effect of across seasons. So either through decapitalization of investment or through making the drought risk more salient and inducing households to increase their precautionary savings as they move forward. And these are the impacts that we want to see our technologies mitigate. The second line is going to capture the parameters necessary for to look at the effects of drought-tolerant seed, both the contemporaneous mid-season drought and whether or not access to drought-tolerant seed cuts off that pathway that would cause those effects to spill over into the next season. I've written out, this is the switch version of those effects. If you really read the conditional expectations closely, you'll see that what we're really doing is turning on and off access to the technology in a certain type of drought condition, and then using linear combinations of these parameters to identify the effect, to quantify the effect. Not our identification comes from our randomization. So here, let's take a look at the mitigating potential of the drought-tolerant maize seed. And what we see is the access to the drought-tolerant maize seed does a really good job of mitigating the effect that it was bred to mitigate. It almost completely erases the within season effect of mid-season drought among the households in our sample. And that's true. In doing so, it also then mitigates the cross-season effects. So with access to the drought-tolerant maize, the mid-season drought shocks no longer spill across seasons for households.
You have 5 minutes left, Jonathan.
Perfect. Thanks, Rashid. We can do the same thing then with the insurance. So the parameters we need are going to come from this line. And with insurance, we're thinking exclusively about that cross-season effect. And insurance payments don't happen until, in this case, prior to the next season. They're in kind. The insurance payment isn't going to allow households, obviously doesn't have an effect on the within season yields. Its potential and its purpose is to keep those cross-season effects from happening. And we see that it does this, and it does this, it more than offsets the lagged impacts. In fact, it almost triple offsets, or the magnitude of the effect is almost triple the negative cross-season effect of severe drought shocks. And this is going to be interesting. We're going to spend our last couple minutes thinking about how this might affect or might occur, and whether or not it's credible. So far we've largely spoken to kind of two of our questions for the day, which is, and the answer is yes. The drought-tolerant maize and the index insurance, they do what they're bred to do, or they do what they're created to do, and combining them allows us to mitigate the risks within season and across season that drought is imposing on these households. That last effect, the cross-season mitigation, is extremely large and worth thinking about a little bit more. It's not anomalous. Other papers that have started to study the same thing show similar results. They show that these tools can be really effective for households, and where they show these large effects, it's usually attributed to the fact that as you provide access to risk-reducing technologies, households, as they learn that they're effective, double down. And they free precautionary savings for productive use, and then they deepen their investment and are able to experience not just risk mitigation effects, but productivity increases as well. So we use a similar specification to look at both intensive and extensive margin investment. We focus on investment in seed and fertilizer and area under maize. And we take that similar switch approach, this time exclusively focusing on end line, which is the only place where we could really see the investment impacts of the cross-season effect. And once again, we see sizable impacts of access to the technologies on this kind of cross-season effect. Access to DT fully mitigates the reduced investment that drought often imposes on households whenever we look at the end line. And insurance, once again, more than offsets that negative effect. And we see this both in expenditures and in maize area. So both in intensive and extensive levels of investment. You may have surmised, given my last bullet point, that it's not going to be quite this simple or this rosy. We were left with this one question, which is, how are these effects enhanced and undercut by early experience? And this is really a question about how households learn about technologies that don't make their benefits visible all the time. Both drought-tolerant maize and indexed insurance are technologies like this. So if there's a severe drought, you have an opportunity to learn about how insurance works, and when drought-tolerant maize does season drought, you get to learn about what DT maize can offer, but you don't see the benefits of insurance firsthand. And if you get a good year, hopefully you're happy with your choices, but you don't learn directly about either of the two risk mitigating technologies. And what we have seen happen and others have seen happen is something like this. And so when there's a shock, or when you get to experience a shock while you're experimenting with the technology, households seem to really double down and deepen their investment. So the gray dots here are control household outcomes when there's no shock at midline, and when there is a midline shock. The orange dots are outcomes for households that had access to the bundled drought-tolerant maize and indexed insurance product without a shock and with a shock. And what we see is if they experienced a midline shock, they really deepen their investment and in the end line and increase their confidence in the technology. If they don't, they seem to run away. They pull back really quickly. And this is one of the reasons I'm so glad Paswel is here today to talk to you, to take this from me and talk about scaling up, because this learning piece is really important to figuring out how to scale up these technologies. Households seem to be making decisions really quickly. And if we don't provide the right learning opportunities, they can really lose out on the opportunity to use these technologies that offer a long-term prospect of increased resilience. The last thing I'll say as I pass it over to Paswel is, this work is continuing both on the research side. I'm involved in some follow-up work in Mozambique, but also on the scale-up side. Our partner in Mozambique for the insurance is Hollard Insurance, and this year Hollard Insurance launched their Clima Seguro product, which is a kind of a branded, flexible bundle of index insurance and drought-tolerant maize, where it's offered through agri-dealers. Households can buy drought-tolerant maize seed and add on this insurance product. And so they've really seen the potential through this research project and are hoping to scale it up and make it accessible to households. And with that, I'll pass it over to Well, actually, I think we're going to take some questions, right, Rashid? And then I'll pass it over to Paswel.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much
for the presentation. We do want to leave maybe 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes for questions that would be about the presentation, the paper itself. Leave any question that would be discussing the upscaling for after Paswel's presentation, please. So anyone has a question?
We have a question in the chat from Kamal, who wanted some more explanation on how DTM reduces the spillover effect in some subsequent seasons.
Sure. So the hypothesized link here is in avoiding decapitalization. And so if you, and remember sorry, I messed up my screen. the type of shocks against which we are showing that drought-tolerant maize is successful at avoiding decapitalization is against mid-season drought. And so imagine that you plant drought-tolerant maize, you experience mid-season drought, you still manage to get a good harvest. That translates to available food, that translates to available income, and then that income can be used next season to continue to invest in your maize plot. Whereas if you don't use drought-tolerant maize, you experience a mid-season drought, your harvest fails. Now your resources need to be devoted to maintaining your household, and you're not able to invest in that next season.
There's another question in the chat from Hambungama. Could you remind us how you defined and measured drought and resilience? I may have missed it in your talk, given you only had the 3-year period. Is that long enough to measure resilience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So resilience is actually really hard to define and measure. There's a lot of work. One of my co-authors and a former student of mine, so Michael Carter and Mohammed Alouche, have been doing some work on actually using this data and to come up with some empirical measures of resilience. Kind of building on that picture that I showed at first, or at the beginning. So we're really defining resilience as in a number of ways. First, it's the ability to avoid harm whenever a shock occurs. And then second, it's the ability to recover after a shock. And yes, I agree. 3 years is a short period to really demonstrate or to define resilience. But it's a long enough period to watch households experience whenever you have access to mitigating technologies, and also to see the extent to which those technologies allow you to recover afterwards. And then how are we defining drought? Drought, we work with 2 different types of drought here, given the characteristics of the technologies. Mid-season drought is, test my memory, I believe mid-season drought here is defined as getting less than 200 millimeters of rainfall in the days 40 through 80 of the maize growing season. So the maize growing season is about 120 days. Maize needs 500 to 800 millimeters of rain across that period. And we have very precise planting dates for the households in the sample. And so we can create season-specific or individual specific rainfall for households in sample, and that allows us to capture that mid-season period. And then severe drought is defined as a season in which predicted yields for a household are below 60% of historical average, using kind of historical yield data and a satellite model that predicts yield with satellite measured rainfall and NDVI.
Another question. So first, do feel free to talk and ask your question directly. I think it's always better when you can. I'm reading questions in case for some reasons people can't. Can you please share from Vitimonio? Can you please share the reference for your definition of drought?
Yeah, so here I'm gonna refer you to the paper. The rainfall measures, or the rainfall needs of maize that I cited, were provided by our CIMMYT colleagues. This was a great project to have close collaboration with the International Center for the Improvement of Maize and Wheat. And that was instrumental both in kind of designing the insurance and in understanding how to make it complement the drought-tolerant maize. But there's a lot of detail on how we measured rainfall and kind of where the thresholds for defining drought come from in the paper.
Another question last question from me is, are those average yield lower than 400 kgs per hectare typical in the survey areas, or an artifact?
An artifact of the data. Yes, and
I must say that even I, who worked in Mozambique, I think yields were getting close to 1,000 kg per hectare. Yep. That was already really low, but 400, it did seem really low.
Yeah, so a number of thoughts. The average control group yields are a little higher across the 3 years, but not a lot, like half a ton. The answer is yes to both in some ways. It's typical of the areas where we were working, and the areas where we were working is somewhat an artifact of the data. We chose the areas where we felt like the technologies, so we chose the districts where we felt like the technology had a lot of potential. And that meant working in some pretty remote areas in Mozambique. Rashid mentioned his previous project, compared to the location. And Rashid's previous project was not exactly in easily accessible areas. The parts of Mozambique we worked in for this project are notably less accessible and farther, which means they're farther from agro-input dealers and less well served by, say, the extension system. So yes, it is low, and that is typical. There are areas where it's higher, and a lot of the scale-up efforts kind of focus on those a little bit more commercial areas. But we expect definitely the protective effects of the drought tolerant trait to translate really well there, and hopefully the insurances as well. That doesn't feel like a satisfying answer, but it's also, I had lots of conversations with CIMMYT colleagues, and especially the seed breeding team as I did the field work, where we were constantly discussing this and discussing the type of farmers that were active in the regions where we were working, and it often took me a lot of time to convince them that both the practices and the yield that we were seeing from farmers could possibly be the norm. And when you get farther from agro-input dealers and you get farther from kind of more commercial, well-served areas, they really are, and the need for kind of education and extension and for expanding access to improved inputs into the more remote, more risk-prone areas in Mozambique and in Tanzania is very real, and something that deserves our continued attention.
Maybe I had a question as well. I see that Paswel raised his hand as well. Do you want to answer one of the questions perhaps before?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to second what Jonathan is saying, because I remember in parts of Tanzania, one of the areas was actually at that time the local or maybe the national authorities were suggesting farmers to stop growing maize there and saying, we would like you to be growing maize, sorghum instead. So that kind of illustrates what Jonathan is saying, that these were not typical marginal, but fairly very marginal areas, not the medium productivity areas where you get 1,000 kilograms per hectare. About 1.8 tons per hectare, which is medium productivity areas. These were below that in view. If you look at the dryness, and also Jonathan, during those years, they were tough years in some ways also. That period was a tough period for this region as well, almost like what you're seeing in Southern Africa today.
Yep.
So,
and
yes,
there's some stuff in the chat. I know Rashid had a question about, is their productivity kind of an issue in these? Yeah, but people are going to keep growing maize, and they're going to keep being exposed to these weather risks. And in some senses, that means that the potential is really high, and the likelihood of seeing an effect, maybe given some of the practices and given some of the the challenges already facing maize in these areas was low. And so the fact that we see such strong effects even in the most adverse conditions for these technologies, I think really speaks to their potential. And it makes us really ask kind of where do we want to focus our efforts? And if it's not on the most vulnerable, then how are we going to serve that group? And I think we're really demonstrating here that these technologies have some potential to serve those very, very vulnerable groups.
I'll get back to my question, and you can see that there are other questions also in the chat. I'm still puzzled by how do you, and one of these questions also connects to the question in the chat, by the way. So how do you explain, what mechanism can explain that you interact the insurance with a severe shock and you get 3 times the effect? Because we usually think that at best it fully compensates for the shock. It's as if you didn't have the shock, but thinking that you get even better than if you didn't have a shock seems a bit weird or surprising. So what mechanism would get you there? Second, in the interpretation of the magnitude, are these intention to treat effects? So how do we think of these? If this is intention to treat, and if you haven't, I don't think you've said the take up, but if it's 50%, it means that you're not 3 times more, but you have 6 times more. So adjusting for the ITT effect, what is the actual magnitude compared to the effect, and really what would be the mechanism to get so much more?
Yeah, take up is about 50%, and so yeah, they're very large. In terms of mechanism, I really believe it's especially I'm going to back this up with kind of that last figure where we really see the effects only among the end line effects, especially only among the sample that experienced a shock at midline. So I really think that it's learning and it's deepening of investment. And these risks are so salient. Mid-season drought occurs in something like 70% of household season years in this area when we backcast using our kind of yield recall and available satellite data. The bigger shocks less frequently, but these risks are so salient that they're causing households to hold significant amounts of precautionary savings. So these households could be investing more, but they're not investing more because they know that it's so likely that they suffer due to a drought. And that suffering due to a drought has big effects on their household's food security and on their ability to invest in the following seasons. And so as these technologies demonstrate their potential, and the story that we're telling is that once households observe the protective effects and experience it for themselves, then that's allowing them to move resources that were either in some other use or saved precautionarily into more active investment. And that we see that both through increasing total expenditures, increasing expenditure per hectare, and expanding the area that's in maize. So I agree. I think those effects are big. It's on the yield side, it's pretty easier to I think justify given how far below the potential of the seeds yield potential kind of yields were to start with. And so there's lots of room to grow there, and moving into drought tolerant maize, which is a kind of current generation improved variety over kind of saved local seed, offers just a huge potential. But we're seeing them increase dollar expenditure, investment, and increase area. So I really think it's this learning story. And if they don't learn, we don't see it.
So I'd love to discuss it further, and I have some suggestions of alternative mechanisms that we could discuss. But first we need to let's see if Paswel have his 10-minute presentation as well, and then we can have a general discussion.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, everyone, for the questions and for the opportunity to share.
Thanks.
Okay, no, thanks, Jonathan and colleagues, for the nice discussion. So this is just to try, if I can get this thing from me. This is just to try to sort of bring it home, if you like. So I think what Jonathan has demonstrated, as he was saying when he started his talk, is the potential and the proof of concept, if you like. But the proof of concept is not the proof of the eating, which is in the, it's not the proof of the pudding, which is in the eating. So it is the scaling that will be the proof of the pudding, or the proof of the pudding is the eating. Anyway, we need to find ways of turning the proof of concept into something that the private sector can scale, and therefore the demonstrated benefits can actually become resilience building, productivity enhancing. New varieties can get into marginal areas like that and stay like that. Agro dealers can invest or can maintain the supply. Seed companies can maintain the supply chains. Insurance companies can work with seed companies to do that. So, and that's what I would like to talk about. I think the process was basically what Jonathan has described. It looks simple, but the partnerships involved were quite a lot. And actually, that's where the bulk of the work starts. Getting the right people to join you before you can launch the product, get the data back, something that's realistic. For example, here we had UC Davis, think of it. In total, we worked with 4 seed companies, local agricultural ministry people, researchers from local research institutes in Mozambique and Tanzania, 2 insurance companies, Hollard in Mozambique, UAP in Tanzania, and there was an international insurer. So, but it all worked out. It's easy to see how that can happen in a research setting where you can sit down, it's small scale, and you can get those partnerships to work within that short time. It is another ball game to actually get all that to work in a real world sense. This slide is just saying what was everybody doing there. At CIMMYT, we facilitated seed company partnerships, prepared farmers' educational materials. We helped supervise the execution of those activities. UC Davis have a long experience with designing these products, so they took the lead in that. Seed companies were here to supply the seed, get the contracts to farmers, collect the premiums from farmers, et cetera, Ministry people, as you can see there, UAP and Hollard were developing the actual insurance contracts, engaging the insurer, passing on payouts where those were called for. So it was a really mimicking what would happen in the real world. However, we do think that we learned a number of lessons, which is what I'm sharing with you here. And those lessons are relevant to taking the concepts and then making them into realistic products that then can scale. One of the things is that if you're going to be dealing with large numbers of farmers, which is what scaling is in this case, if you're going to get many farmers to join in many areas, you need very sophisticated registration, tamper-proof registration systems, etc. So that must be part of it, and a data management system that is simple, but also tamper-proof, comprehensive enough, privacy protection. So you must have an infrastructure for a digital infrastructure for doing that, and then the piloting. So it seems that if we are going to move from upstream concept testing to downstream value chain commercial testing work, we need a lot more regional trials and piloting, much like what the breeders do for their regional trials. Think about things like distributional costs, how that gets into the price of the bundle. What are the volumes of seed you need to ensure for the bundled product to make sense, for example? Because if the volumes are low, it's likely that the price of seed, bundled or not, the higher, because of low volumes, and that sometimes restricts the penetration of seed markets into these marginal areas if demand for seed is thin there. So, but then it could be there's a learning element here, and this could be controversial. I think maybe my colleagues in this paper will disagree with me here, that insurance, maybe you want to try, if you're doing just insurance piloting, maybe you need to do that where you're not dealing with complexity, where new seed, new insurance, because farmers will have to do two things at the same time: learn about new seeds, learn about insurance. So if you're doing, say, downstream marketing, I beg your pardon, piloting, then maybe you want to do that in places where there's a bit more sophistication in terms of the commercial markets. And I think Jonathan alluded to that whole lot in Mozambique, whom we worked with even in those days, is now trying this out. I think it's probably in early days. I could guess they are still in the piloting phase, but commercial piloting. And that they are trying that in the more developed markets. So it looks like that. But I think what you can take away from a research like this is, if this thing works in a really difficult situation, in a very marginal area, that gives it the robustness, or gives you the confidence that it could work in a less marginal environments, much like you test your machines in very tough conditions, because you know that will make them work under normal conditions. It does require input.
3 minutes left.
Sorry, time is
3
up.
minutes.
3 minutes? Okay, I'll be done. It does require very careful demand creation. One of the things we considered is that farmers have multiple input costs. Fertilizers are responsible for about 30%, and labor is a big issue. So if you're going to be thinking about a comprehensive package of inputs, that could help also move insurance along, because if it touches on seed, but it could touch on other inputs as well, that could help the scaling along. Coalitions, I think that's what I've just been talking about. This is something that requires multiple organizations to work together, and this could be actually the most difficult thing to do. So the take-home message is that we need to implement this thing along a R&D chain as follows. The proof of concepts that you see coming out of advanced research institutions like CGIAR and the universities, great, that must be done, because without that, you're headed nowhere. And then from that, you start to go downstream a little bit, test the commercial viability, development impact as well. But with that, it must be supported by careful business analytics. And then with that, value chains. Of course, you might need policy issues there, but that's not something we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about here. So I think to finish, what we need is basically, if the environment is right, to test things on an ongoing basis, focus on farmer education, make sure the bundle offers clear value proposition to farmers, and that there's a strong business case for the seed companies and insurance sector. For the public sector, if the government is going to pitch in a little bit with resources, for example, you could think of that, but there has to be a development impact proposition for the public sector to come in, and then capacity development for everyone involved. So there's quite a bit of moving parts to come to actually when the wrap-up meets the road conditions of the real world. But that's what I was meant to kind of throw this out to help all of us think about these things in that way. Actually, right now we are thinking exactly along these lines, and we'll be trying to test some of these in some of our current projects. Thank you very much. Over to you,
Paswel. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Questions? Comments?
Maybe I need to stop because I can't see anything.
While other questions appear, Paswel, I'm a little bit with the question. Is there any current initiative to scale up the insurance that was implemented? Because you kind
I
of
think that's
gave
what,
general rules on how it should be done, but at the end it's not clear whether something is currently happening or not.
yeah, no, I think that's what Jonathan was mentioning, that their current effort is actually a little bit downstream from what we did years ago. Jonathan, did you want to take up that? I haven't been involved in the current Mozambique effort, so maybe Jonathan, because
I can only
moves
really
quite-
speak to the Mozambique side, because
yeah, no, sure.
that's where I've continued to work. But yes, so Hollard, our partner, both of our partners, on the C company side and the insurance side, were very, very pleased with the pilot and saw a lot of potential in it. And so they've continued to work together to make the different versions of the product available. And this does get into a little bit kind of insurance quality in maintaining insurance quality as kind of the really research intensive research backs off. But they did a few things, just those two partners for a couple of years, and then we're working with them now to really this scale up. And what they've gone live with so far is that Clima Seguro product that can be added to any drought tolerant seed, and that they're trying to market through agro dealers. So training agro dealers as insurance agents to really get increase access. But as Paswel mentioned, it's really the registration process is the holdup at the moment. They have a pretty good product. It works pretty well. There's a lot of interest in it, but getting education out to households, which is what my current research project in this space looks at, testing the differential effectiveness on sustained uptake of kind of short-term and smart subsidies versus kind of more educational community meeting extension style promotion. But it's all on the back of this now kind of commercially available version through Hollard and the seed company partners in Mozambique.
Yeah, just to fill up the airtime here. So one of the things I think we are thinking about, Rashid, is to say it requires doing a bit of ideation with insurance, seed, and other actors, relevant actors. As you saw, you need quite a number of people at the table for this to work, and therefore begin to say, okay, what would be the kinds of seed volumes that would make this work? Or what would be the volume of signups if you're an insurance company that would make this work, that would give you a break-even business proposition? Yeah, would it be in a contiguous market, a compact market, or can this be scattered all over the country? Because if you're an insurance person, the more your clients are scattered, the better for you if they're in that little area. So those sorts of things. And we are hoping to do something like that in Tanzania soon, where we get the value chain actors to actually begin to say something about these business analytics issues. And after that, I don't know when that will be, actually say something about actual data, who collects the data, and then the dissemination of that data to inform the industry in order to make the right decision. It could be proprietary. You create a system, a framework, and everybody does it because some of that is proprietary business information. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there to say, yes, there's that thinking going on the value chain side, but as well as the farmer education side that Jonathan is talking about, which is quite foundational, actually.
That I'll add to that, Paswel, is I think that one of the real challenges in that process is maintaining the insurance quality, especially given how quickly we have observed households to make up their mind and what we know about how experiencing a basis risk event can kill an insurance market really quickly. And the informational needs to create insurance zones and assign households to insurance zones using kind of strictly administrative data is really, really challenging.
Perhaps one last question to wrap up, if there are no more questions now. And I've often felt that perhaps the greatest challenge with these insurances is that it's very somewhat institution intensive and kind of research intensive. And so it's always, it seems like it works as long as it's supported by actual researchers that are behind it. But there are few, but not that many examples that actually hold pretty well once the researchers disconnect from it. And can it hold on its own? Can it, I mean, people don't trust it sometimes. I mean, building the trust is hard, and perhaps for some good reasons. Perhaps once there is no more UC Davis, then you have some insurers that actually take the money and then they don't help them. So this is sort of the institution intensive. How do you make sure that people don't get cheated? How do you make sure that it remains well designed? You also have all the incentives to create, lots of insurances create designs that receive the fees and always find obstacles to not pay when people need it. How do we not get that way once the researchers pull out?
I think that's
Do you have a
that's a
feeling
really
that
good
it
question.
do you have a feeling that it can work pretty well without researchers, or does it really looks like it needs to be supported by academic researchers? And I mean,
I think it
research.
can. I think it can. But I think you bring up a really good point. I don't think it's definitely not automatic. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build trust and to come up with kind of a way, a process for deploying it in new insurance in new places where there hasn't been kind of, we have a decade of working with Holler. They're very, we're not running this commercial product for them anymore, but we've been very involved in helping them think it through and helping them think about kind of how small insurance zones, we're using the smallest administrative unit available in Mozambique, and they're able to do that with some support from us to actually read the index. And so I think it's really hard to offer quality, even to know the quality of the product. The product that this research was based on, we had teams out in the field doing very detailed retrospective yield analysis in all of these areas. Specifically, we created custom zones so that our insurance could be as high quality as possible. And even in that best case scenario, it's hard to, as you say, build trust and generate effectiveness and all of these things. And when you try to scale that up to a country, and the beauty of index insurance is that it's supposed to be easier to administer, and it's supposed to make payouts more quickly and in an automated fashion, so that households don't have to wait and they can trust that it'll happen and that there's not an administrative kind of process in the background that's working against them. But the mechanics that need to happen or need to be in place for that to happen are a huge barrier. And there's lots of, I think there's lots of learning left to do in order to come up with ways to make it easier for commercial partners to take it and run with it.
That's well, final word.
No, that's exactly correct. I like to summarize all that, I think, by saying business analytics, because what we are doing here is basically good old microeconomic analysis, understanding farmer behavior, and then proving a concept around that. After that, then you need to go, you remember my slide? We need equally rigorous business analytics, number one. Number two, equally rigorous identification of learning strategies for farmers and learning and trust building. And number three, institutional analysis, whether that's regulatory or business coalitions in that sense. So I would add it to those three things if I was creating a 3-point headline as suggestion for that. Yeah.
Perfect closure. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting work, and congratulations on this publication and all the work behind it.